My name is Angela Flett. I was born Angela Marie Ledoux way back in the mid-50s, born in a community of Duck Bay, Manitoba. I am the eldest of 11 children. I have 7 sisters and 3 brothers, and my mom's name was Evelyn Elizabeth Monroe, and my dad's name was Abraham Joseph Ledoux. My parents originated from Duck Bay. I lost a sister to cancer a couple years ago, and I have 2 brothers that have since passed on to health-related issues, and I have 1 brother and 7 sisters left. We had kind of like a little village of our own in the southern part of Duck Bay. We were all related to each other in that area. I would say about 900, maybe 1,000 people. All I remember was when I grew up, when I first went to school when I was 6 years old, was there was a school there, and there was a church, and there was a hotel, and there was a fish hatchery, and there was 5 different businesses in town. When I was growing up as a child, I did not know that I was Métis. I did not identify myself as, or did I hear of it as being Métis. We just all grew up together. When I mentioned the businesses that were in Duck Bay before, they were not all, because I know now, but I didn't know back then, was they were non-Aboriginal businessmen. But I considered them as just people living in the community of Duck Bay. There was no distinction between Indigenous and non-Indigenous, as they call it today.
It wasn't a thing. There was no color lens.
There was no color lens for me.
Yeah.
They were just people living in a community that I was raised in. It was the same for me. I've never identified myself as Métis until I got to grade 9. And I went to elementary school from grade 1 to grade 8 in Duck Bay. Then we got transported to Cranberry Portage, which was a 6-hour drive from Duck Bay up north. That's when I learned that we were Métis, and I didn't know that until, and yet coincidentally, this is a coincidence, the person that did cultural awareness training for the grade 9 students up in Cranberry Portage just happened to be my mom's cousin, George Monroe.
Oh, really?
That was the first time that I heard that I was a Métis person. I had no idea. I was 14, yeah. By the time I found out, I was 14. But if you talk to people today, they identify Duck Bay as being a Métis community, and I don't identify Duck Bay as being a Métis community. Back then, it was just a community that I was born and raised in.
How was school in Cranberry?
Difficult.
Yeah, what was the most difficult part?
Not being with the family. You felt a disconnect.
Yeah.
We were allowed to go home during Christmas and Easter and came home in the summer. Stayed home for 2 months, then got shipped back again.
Yeah.
But the thing that was most hard was not speaking my language. So when I first mentioned earlier when I went to school, being from the South, I spoke Cree, and I didn't know English until I went to school. And we were taught by nuns, so I had to learn how to speak Soda with the kids playing on a playground, but in school we had to learn English, learn and read and write English. That was the most difficult part going to school in Cranberry, was being away from my family, not seeing my brothers and sisters, and trying to get an education and trying to, most of the time being lonely and wanting to go home. But 6-hour ride. You're just a teenager, like I didn't know any better. I only lived in Duck Bay and then got sent to Cranberry. It was like a culture shock for me. It was expected that the kids would be sent to high school. It was just that it was done. Like we didn't have any say. It was just you're going to, and they bussed up the kids and they would bring a bus, and kids that went to school from Duck Bay would filled up one bus itself. I didn't know when I was going to school that Duck Bay was considered a day school. It was just a school to me that we were told we had to go to school to get an education. I do agree with some of the stories that I've heard with people that say that they went to residential school and later called Duck Bay a day school, is that I did see some of the, I don't know how to say this, is that there was some actions that were done to the children that I grew up with. If they misbehaved, they were punished. And I would rather not say how they were punished, but they were. It's just something that you accepted growing up as a child. And that it was just, if you didn't follow the guidelines of the school for the day-to-day, that they would punish you in a certain way. And sometimes it wasn't physical punishment, it was more like making you stand in a corner, shaming you, putting a hat on your head and calling you a dunce or something. I didn't know what that meant back then, but I do now. And if you accidentally went to school with gum and you weren't allowed to chew gum in school, they would put it on your nose. They would force you to put it on your nose. And with my hair tied back up right now, I had longer hair growing up. And if the nun would see you at the desk and you didn't have your hair tied back, she would get a rubber band and make you tie your hair up. And then when you got home, it was quite difficult to take off. That's what I mean by how they treated the children. And I myself experienced that. But that's what I remember. One of the hardest challenge I would think being Métis was that recognition. We weren't recognized as Métis because I myself did not recognize myself as a Métis growing up. So how would I know that distinction? Was difficult for me until I was 14 and I found out in Cranberry Portage that I was Métis. And it didn't do anything to me because I didn't know anything about being a Métis person. And I didn't know Duck Bay was considered a Métis community. My favorite Métis tradition is picking blueberries in the summertime after school was over. Usually July, the end of June, beginning of July until the end of August. It was 2 months away from the community at Duck Bay. At first it was Cowan, in the Cowan area, and then we moved further towards Kettle Hills later on. They would kind of put them, they would freeze them or they would share, and we would always have a meal with it. So that was kind of like what they did with the berries, yeah. They would probably boil them and make jam right away, but usually the kids would be too greedy and they would eat it all up right away.
That's not usual, right?
No, that wasn't me. I wasn't allowed to eat it. I just picked it.
You were just a worker.
I was just a worker. I wasn't allowed to eat berries. Growing up, like I said, my dad had brothers, and so my dad was musical. He played the fiddle and the guitar. So they worked Monday to Saturday, and they would come home at night. On a Saturday after supper, they would clear out the kitchen table and they would all sit around and they would start playing music. The fiddle would come out, the guitar, and there would be somebody sure jigging up a storm in the kitchen. I went back home after I graduated from high school. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had my grade 12. So I was just thinking about it, and then being a young person and not going to school and just living in the community, you started forming friendships. And one of the friendships I started to form was getting into a relationship. And it was not long after that I ended up getting married.
And where did you get married?
In Duck Bay, and raising 2 boys. My husband is Clifford Flett, and my son is Clifton and Corey Flett at that time. My oldest has 3, Clifton, and he's got twins that are 21, a boy and a girl, and he's got an older boy that's 26 and in college. I have when I first got married, the school in Duck Bay was probably the most productive place to get a job. Like, they would hire you. So I worked at the school in Duck Bay as the librarian, assistant librarian, and custodian, and I would be answering the phone as well. when I got pregnant, I had to stay home. So when that happened, they already hired my positions out, so I went looking for another job. It wasn't something for me to stay home after my boys were in school, so I started looking for work. And what work I found was I was working in a fish hatchery. I was their bookkeeper and I would work 6 days a week. And then in 1982, my husband and I decided to move to Dauphin for work opportunities for him and also for my 2 boys to have access to activities, recreational activities. My oldest son wanted to play hockey. So that's kind of like why we ended up in Dauphin, just to see what was out there. When we first got married, we moved into my husband's old place. Like he was raised in that house, but we moved in there. Then when we left, we moved into Dauphin, and we ended up getting our own place we rented through Anishinaabe housing. It was difficult at first. It was different living in a larger community and commuting. I didn't have a driver's license, and I didn't have a vehicle. My husband had, because he was out working. So I would walk all over, and my boys would drive their bicycle when we went shopping. Well, my husband still plays with the boys, Chris Parker Band. He's the manager. He's the one that got them going. The reason why we started the band is because my father-in-law was having his 75th birthday, and my husband wanted to do something for his dad's birthday. So we got my oldest son, who already played guitar, and my younger son. I entered him into, when we were talking about programming for youth, back then when we started the committees, they had fiddling program. And I enrolled my youngest son in there, and he was learning how to play the fiddle. So when they first started, it was my son with the fiddle, my oldest son with the guitar, and my husband would play guitar as well. And it was just the 3 of them, and they would just jam with each other, and they seemed to like it, so they still continue to this day, and they're still playing. I tried to learn how to play the guitar when I was younger, but I couldn't pick it up. My fingers just wouldn't do what they are supposed to do with the strings. My brother caught on right away, but I couldn't. I got laid off from the job in Duck Bay. Well, when you move, you lose your position. So I attended Canada Employment Center at that time, and they seen that I was an older woman that didn't have any experience working in an office. So they suggested that I take this 10-month course to become an administrative assistant in a business. So I took that course, and from there I started gaining employment. I started working at the Friendship Center for 11 years and 3 months. And then the federal government took it upon themselves to let all of the outreach workers at the time, that was my position. So I didn't have a job, so I had to go on EI once again and look for employment. And I was pounding the pavement for about a year, literally pounding the pavement, and I didn't get a job. And then my EI was running out, and then the vice president at the time of the Métis Federation, which I didn't know at the time, was Gordon Flett. He's now since passed. And he took pity on me. No other word to say. But he took pity on me and gave me a job. And I started working, and I've been with the Northwest since then. March 23rd will be my 25th year.
25 years.
Of this year. It's been very good to me. When I started working for the Northwest Metis Council, I worked in various positions. As the federation grew, there was different people that came in. and vice presidents changed, and my friend and mentor, Albert Chartrand, came into the picture, and he started doing things differently. So he kind of like wanted my assistance in doing some of the stuff in the office. So way back when, we started to think about how we can get the younger people involved into the federation. So hence we started the wellness, sport and wellness or something like that. I forget what it was called. It was an advisory committee, yeah. There was various youth in the community. My son was part of the recreation and wellness committee is what they were called, along with some other young people from the surrounding communities. And it just developed into what it is now, yeah. When I first started, there was only the vice president and 2 board of directors. And I was the only staff person. They had the local advisory committee, and they had a child and family services worker, but they were in a different part of the office at that time when I first started. So the connection was not always there. The one thing I do remember, his vision was that he wanted to have a building that we could call our own, because we bought the buildings. We bought that building, the old one on 41st Avenue Northwest, we bought that building, but he wanted to build one that was truly belonging to the Métis people. And his vision, he's not here, but his vision is still going. People referred to him as larger than life, like he was just there and he was all over the place, and he had more vision than I think anybody else at that time. The only thing that I would like to encourage the youth is to get involved at their community that they live in. Approach an elder, a family member, a friend, and just start talking and say, I want to become a part of the Red River Métis today. What do I do? Can I do something to volunteer so I could learn? Because I would like to be part of. My words of wisdom for the Métis youth today is to be true to yourself, believe in yourself, believe in Métis as being the Red River Métis today. Don't be afraid. Just be yourself, and if you're afraid, you could come to me. Perfect. I will help you out. So now that I'm finished with this interview, what I can say is, now I am a Red River Métis. I did not identify myself as a Red River Métis when I was growing up, but now I can. Kudos to the Manitoba Métis Federation for sticking around and not going anywhere.